welcome back to the Restive Perspective, a show about Restive Ventures and our views on the market. And we are back for our third installment on our Go Restive event and breaking down some of the interviews there. Ryan has been invited back again. So we're
still here. It came back.
So we're excited.
Like a new format.
Yeah, it's got a good partner in crime here. And today we're actually going to talk about a panel that I moderated. So we're excited to dig into it.
Yeah. So the format. I mean, just a quick reminder for people. This was an event we did really geared to early stage founders to really learn from the best. And so we had a couple of kind of bigger keynotes, which we covered in the first and the second episode. Ken Lin and then Ethan Block. And then we had a number of these great panels during the day. And we also had some really strong breakout sessions. So the breakout sessions, we had OpenAI and Anthropic and Stripe and some law firms there, and founders could sit down and kind of say, "Hey, this is what I'm trying to work on. How can I do better?" But then we also some of these panels really brought kind of the best in class founders and some were real leaders in the industry to talk about kind of how they built their business and how they're working in like real time to solve some of the issues. And so one of those panels was around really enterprise sales and how to build the B2B, fintech company. And this was a panel that Cameron moderated, and had with Sardine, Alloy, Ascend on this panel. And so this great, all three founders had built, really significant businesses. They're all, I'd say, kind of leaders in their field, having now raised tens or in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. And really, there were founders we've known since the beginning. And it was interesting for me to hear because Cameron, before she joined us, had built a pretty significant business in Aslo, which was a small business focused neobank. You had to solve a lot of these issues yourself. And so I thought, like, listening to this panel, it was really like kind of a masterclass in like, okay, hey, this is what I'm, this is where I ran into issues. Would you solve? And then you got this kind of really cool back and forth at points where some of the panelists would be like, well, wait, what are you guys doing on that front? Like, what's your strategy towards that? So Cam, as you were putting this together, like what was the most interesting part for you? Where did you really feel that it had kind of taken a life of its own?
When people got really tactical about what they were doing. And I knew going into this that this was going to be a really tactical conversation because we get questions from founders all the time. When should I hire my first head of sales? Should it be a BDR or a senior person? How should I think about, the first call in the sales funnel? And so I knew we needed to get like real in the weeds for it to be helpful with the audience. And so I knew it would tee up that way, but we got to the point where people were talking about how they structured their dinner series, the sort of hats that they gave out as swag every year. And you saw to your point, like the other panelists' eyes kind of light up and like start trading notes. And so that's where it just became this kind of like information sharing among founders, and everyone else was privy to this conversation as opposed to it being a structured interview.
I was surprised by hearing it was that like all three of these founders, so Laura Spiekerman from Alloy, we had Andrew Wynn of Ascend, Soups Ranjan of Sardine, all three of them are still actively selling. Like they're still involved in the sales process. And I knew that kind of intellectually, but to a degree, it sounds like they're literally all involved in all of the sales. And I was just kind of struck that they had eventually all kind of found ways to kind of scale themselves out a little bit. Awesome. Well, I enjoyed listening to this. I actually learned about a new software tool that we should use to manage our own leads. So there's a lot of little practical little tidbits here. So yeah, I guess, Cam, anything else we should be listening for before we dive in?
No, just bring out your note taker of choice because you're right. There's a lot of good tactical advice in there.
A lot of good tactical stuff. Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, enjoy.
The product market fit thing was hard because in 4 years you can't iterate. You're not iterating quickly and learning a whole lot. You're sort of objectively pretty slowly to reach that product market fit. But what we did was talk to as many fintech companies who can adopt your product, right? Like they can move quickly. And then for us, also banks. And what we started with were banks that had a such a pain point with partnering with fintech companies. So there were only a few at the time, like Radius Bank, Cross River Bank. Those banks in the early days were the only partner banks that really existed, and they were desperate for these solutions, and they were willing to partner with startups. And so we sort of found, like, I guess it's an ICP of, like, 3 of them at the time, but it was, and so super small, and you could never sort of defend it as a market that would create a $1 billion startup, but it was enough to start getting that initial feedback. And so we just took, like, literally 3, 4, 5 of those banks over the first couple of years, along with those fintech companies, and just worked with them day in and day out, and had a lot of faith, I guess, that fintech would be bigger someday.
I would say we started relatively similarly, where we were a little too early to market with some of our initial products. My co-founder and I came from consumer. We were very early employees at Instacart, which was heyday of just do whatever, crazy Uber days, same thing with us. And then we started selling enterprise SaaS to insurance companies. So it was pretty different in terms of motion. And we went out to market with product that had good product market fit, but for non-enterprise targets. And so insurance consists of, there's about 35,000 insurance brokers, a few thousand insurance companies. And we started with very, very small insurance brokers, similarly, not because it's a huge market, but because it allowed us to go to market quickly and effectively in what is definitionally a risk-averse industry. So I think that's served us well to get going. And I say we built the initial product alongside those folks. In reality, we probably built it a little bit more on their backs, which then allowed us to become enterprise ready. I think it would have been probably just as good, if not better, to maybe have started with big enterprise companies and purpose built for them rather than trying to change. But that could also just be grass is always greener. Who knows?
Yeah, we had a similar journey. So we also started with smaller, nimbler companies like fintechs and crypto companies were our first 10 customers. We got started right around the time when COVID hit. So I had to hire my entire team during COVID, and I had to do my entire go-to-market as well as fundraising during COVID. So things had already become very different. What I remember, though, was that, to Laura's point as well, we didn't go tackle like the large enterprises or the banks, at least for the first 3 years at all. We only worked with the smaller fintechs or crypto companies or gift card exchanges or e-commerce marketplaces. And the point, I just want to expand upon what Laura said, like getting that feedback loop fast was what was very important to us as well. And we also consciously went towards some of these industries because for us, we started with selling fraud and then later added compliance. And in the case of fraud, you got to go towards the industry which is the highest risk. And in our case, the highest risk industries were crypto exchanges and fintechs, right? And once we found product market fit over there, that's only then did we start expanding and going after other verticals like banks and in broader financial service companies like payment process, insurance, et cetera. And for us now, like that maxim always holds true that, if you grow up in a tough neighborhood, you learn a thing or two, and then you can, apply it everywhere else, right? So, yeah.
And I want to double click on one thing that I think you said, which is really important, which is manufacturing that feedback cycle fast. How did you do that?
Yeah, so the first 5 customers that we had, we almost signed them up to be a design partner type customer, right? We never even presented pricing to them. We started working with them. And we were just we created a shared Slack channel, so we were getting constant feedback all the time. We would have constant sort of like touch points, like weekly cadence of calls as well. And in the case of the industry we are in, right, like fraud, you can't even actually create a fraud product if you don't have feedback. So it was extra important to us, right? Yeah, those are the few things I remember.
So all of you touched on finding a nimble, fast segment and then going up market. How'd you know you were ready? Were they pulling you? Were you pitching them? What did that jump look like? Maybe Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and some days I wonder still if we are ready. I think what happened was a combination of two things. One is we got pulled up market by some folks who are early adopters in these larger segments, and that sort of gave us a little bit of a false confidence that we were ready to go up market, both from a product as well as go-to-market perspective. I would say going up market from a go-to-market perspective was harder for us than it was from a product perspective, because the motions are entirely different, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. You can't just create like a Slack channel with a design partner kind of thing with a large enterprise. But we then had to essentially go up market, had a false start, and rebuild for probably 6 months. So
What did that mean, false start? Like what
we
happened?
thought we were ready. We tried to leverage the same motions, the same, again, product was okay, and we were able to adjust to that quickly enough. But really go-to-market motions, we tried after we got pulled to the rest of the market and just fell completely on our face. And we realized we couldn't just do what we were doing in SMB and mid-market with larger companies, and we had to just start from scratch and relearn, and that was really hard to do because we were successful in SMB and mid-market. So it's like, wait a second, this should be working here, and it wasn't.
And what do you think the biggest difference or some of the bigger gaps are that folks in this room might be able to extrapolate as they think about targeting those big enterprises?
I mean, the whole process is just a lot slower, a lot more multi-threaded. Our buyer was different inside of enterprises than it was in SMBs and mid-market. So I guess I can't obviously speak to other industries, but what I would say is it's probably just going to be very, very different, and it's worth thinking about it from a fresh perspective and first principles rather than trying to go leverage what you have already. Don't assume it will work, I guess.
Laura, anything to add around going up market?
Yeah, I think for us, so we are a compliance and risk and fraud solution largely for banks, and so I'm answering from that perspective where I think it's very different if you're providing a less critical service to a less regulated enterprise. So that's my kind of caveat here. I think it's almost like it's like playing hard to get, I think, is my best sort of analogy, which is like if they don't really want it, they're not going to use it. And so I think there's only so much selling into enterprise for your first few enterprise customers. And so like I think of that as maybe 50 billion in assets or more for a bank, something like that. If they don't really, 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 really need it, they're not going to use you. If you're 10 people and you have $5 million or whatever, it's just not. It's not going to happen, despite the fact that they will call you and tell you that they could do it. And they're going to have their venture people and their innovation people and whoever else calling you and spending time with you and taking meetings with you, and you think you will get somewhere. And I know that because I've done that. I've been the person on the other side that like following them around and like taking all the calls from the big bank venture people and being super excited about it and having call after call after call, and then it's like nothing. You end up in this like little hamster wheel with nothing to show for it. The time it changed for us was we got introduced immediately to a very obvious decision maker. In this case, it was like the head of consumer banking. This was our first 100 billion plus asset size bank. Up until then, we'd never dealt with anything larger than maybe 5 billion, maybe 7 billion. So this was like a big jump for us. And they desperately needed this exact solution. They had been contemplating building it themselves. They fast-tracked us meeting all the decision makers, right? So like all the signs were there that they just really desperately needed this, and they were going to have to work with us. They didn't love that we were like 10 people and barely funded and had an office above a smoke shop. Like they were not, I don't know if we told them that part, but we were not sort of their first choice, but we were the only game in town for what they needed to do. And so I think there's a little bit of like reading the tea leaves. You can't listen to what they say because they will say that they work with startups, but they don't unless they really need you.
Well, and we're going to get to some go-to-market tactics in a few minutes, but it sounds like kind of critical to that is a consultative sales process, right? I mean, really digging into that. Do you want to extrapolate on that a little bit?
Consultative sales process is so important because it does two things. One, your solution will meet their needs by definition because you're going in and you're spending a bunch of time with them and you're learning all of their systems. So in this case, we were replacing, or they had like 11 systems that did all these various identity things at account opening. That's the function that we were dealing with at the time. They had a CRM, they had a blah, 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 they had a mobile and banking thing. They had all this like put together 11 systems, not a great thing. We were, in the end, going to replace 10 of those systems. And so each one of those systems requires us to go in and learn what that system does for them, how it integrates and how the data flows from one system to another, where is a decision getting made, what things are API-able and what things are not. So you sort of go in and have to ask 100 questions before you can even give, one sort of consultation or one piece of advice or one thing that your product will do. And so that's really what we did, is like spend hours and hours and hours in their offices with all the owners of these various systems, asking them all sorts of questions and then providing them with a better design in the end. That was our product. We didn't custom build something, but we do sort of talk about how we are going to replace those 10 systems almost as if it's a custom build, and how we're going to talk to their core and how we're going to do all this stuff. And so it does that, which is designs a solution for them, but it also gives them confidence that you're an expert. And I think that's really important, especially when you're a startup. It's like they have to really trust you, and especially for a critical service, they have to like know that you are legit and that you know what you're talking about, and you're not going to get them in trouble, and you're not going to get like this person who's the decision maker is not going to look like an idiot and get fired for paying you a bunch of money to do this thing. So,
Soups, anything to add about jumping from small ICP to enterprise?
Yeah, so the one thing I would add is that enterprise sales does take a while. So looking at our $1 million plus accounts that we have, they range anywhere from 12 to 18 to like one of them was 30 months, right? So, so one thing that I would advise is that once you have found product market fit and you have the SMB clients using you, and if you're ready to go enterprise, you should jump at it before you think you need it. Because in our case, what worked out was that you would probably get all these opportunities as as you're working with Ryan and team, for example. You'll probably get invited to a bunch of accelerators from banks, etc. Right? We got invited to one of them, and it required a lot of commitment. It required one of the co-founders to actually be there with them. I believe it was 3 to 4 months, right? And none of us, I have two co-founders, none of us, we were already very busy with the SMB side, so none of us were ready to do it. But we had hired a very senior executive out of early morning system. And so he was like, okay, I'll do it. And he just went and planted himself, and he did it. And he planted the seeds with this enterprise client for us, basically in year 2 itself. And it took 30 months to actually close that deal. So, so in hindsight, when I look at it, I'm really glad that we did it. So it did require a lot of investment, but you gotta start doing it, just about the time when you think you're ready.
And maybe another layer on that is just the idea of cash flow. So it takes 30 months to realize revenue from that, and you're kind of balancing your runway with what you're getting from the SMB. How maybe Laura, how did you think about cash flow and fundraising in light of all of these different layered channels?
I mean, we were not counting on any sort of revenue from any enterprises for quite a long time. Not only because we weren't signing them for a long time, but even once you sign them, right, then you're in implementation for 6 months, and you don't really control that. You only control what you control. So a lot of things happen during an implementation that delay it. And depending on how your contracts might be structured, you may not be getting paid until they go live, or whatever. And so, I mean, one thing is you can charge implementation fees, right? So some sort of cash upfront helps mitigate that risk quite a bit, and also helps them be serious and committed to you and committed to your build. But we didn't really plan around any sort of $1 million plus accounts coming in to build a good business. And we were very fortunate to have a really good fintech business at the same time. So for us, we could kind of live off these, not live off, we're a startup, but sort of these onesie twosie, 30, 50K contracts, these kind of smaller contracts that we do with fintech companies, but we did a lot of them that makes a really good business in and of itself. So the sort of big bank business became a little bit more of a cherry on top, ultimately transitioned to a bit much larger part of our business. But I think it would have been really dangerous to plan around. I will say we took way too long to charge the appropriate amount for implementations and for professional services fees. And so that would have helped us do better kind of planning and spending and all of that stuff. And I wish we had done that much earlier.
Do you think there's appetite earlier, just given the risk
Yeah.
for being a startup?
Yeah, I think there's appetite to pay. Yes, I think that banks are like, when when I did a pricing for one of our largest clients at the time, or our largest client at the time, still one of our largest clients, I called someone I knew who worked at a core banking system, and I said, "What do you guys charge?" And he told me, and I said, "Okay, I think I'm just gonna like double that and just see." And then he was like, "Yeah, and add another, whatever." I completely made it up, and they were like, "Okay." So it's like which probably means I should have charged more, right? I mean, this is like they are used to paying a lot of money and lots of implementations and professional services fees. Doesn't mean they won't negotiate, doesn't mean that they always will accept your sticker price, but I think they're used to lots of fees. And so the way that you can mitigate your own cash flow issues is by charging at least some of them.
Andrew, anything to add?
Just on a similar vein, I remember when we did our first big enterprise client, we charged SaaS as well as transactionally, so our SaaS fee was $250K, and I remember being so nervous to ask for it, and then I found out the PwC team that was implementing it was charging them $1 million a month, and I was like, damn.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at these like Accenture, you learn about them, and you're like, oh my God, that's the business we all should be in.
Totally. Well, I'm going to start with you, Soups. Why don't you outline for us what your go-to-market strategy is, what those different channels are, how it's evolved over time, but paint that picture for us.
Yeah, so our go-to-market is the following. So we have we do a few things which are kind of different. So we don't do a lot of the cold emails. We actually don't do it at all. We lead forward with content. So we're actively posting on LinkedIn and Twitter, right? And that has seemed to work quite a lot for us, right? And the content that we're putting out there is really just thought leadership-oriented content, so not really trying to sell Sardine all the time. It's really just about bringing awareness to the issues around fraud and compliance. And that leads to just like opening up the awareness and then results to like building up our inbound pipeline. Or afterwards, even when our BDRs are reaching out to folks on LinkedIn, then it does give them some context. We're not like super cold, right? Then recently we've also started investing in SEO and just starting to put the account-based marketing into motion. So we've identified 20 sub-verticals, like very, very granular, very specific, right? Inside banking itself, there'd be like 5 or 7, or inside e-commerce marketplaces, different types of marketplaces, right? So getting super granular and trying to get more scientific around the where the ad dollars are being spent, or for these 20 verticals, these are the types of articles we need to write, so we get the search engine ranking, etc. So yeah, and then of course the other thing, like if you are doing enterprise sales, we used our investors quite a lot, right? And that's where they're amazing, right? And I remember someone had taught me this trick, so I'll pass it on here. Someone had taught me this trick that if you have investors reaching out to you, even when you're not raising, you should still take the call, and then you take the call and you ask them for intros to like companies in their portfolio, right? And that does two things. It actually, and it was actually counterintuitive, and I later realized it. It's not like the investor is actually doing you a favor. You are also doing the investor a favor, because then the investor is actually going to go and later do back channel with that customer. Like, what did you think about this company, right? Are you going to work with them, et cetera, et cetera? So it's mutually beneficial both ways.
And you kind of implied it, but it sounds like you also have a direct outbound sales team.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and they're doing. You mentioned LinkedIn. Any other kind of tactics that they're using to drive leads?
On the outbound side, it's LinkedIn. It is investors, yeah, and that's and events actually quite a bit. We do quite a bit of events, right? So, And around events, we are hosting a lot of theme-oriented dinners, right? So we'll invite all the fraud leaders and have like a Chatham House style discussion around particular topics around fraud. Similarly, for compliance, we'll do like a closed room dinner. So those things, just about thought leadership, they all help.
Yeah, sounds like you're definitely leading with expertise. Andrew, how about you? Tell us about your go-to-market motion and, again, how it's evolved over time as well.
Yeah, so when we were selling into SMBs and mid-market insurance businesses, again, mostly brokerages, it was a lot easier just to rely on inbound through content and events. And then as we started to focus on the, call it 200 largest insurance brokers in the country, whose revenues range from $100 million to 20 plus billion, it was actually counterintuitively a little bit easier. So we sell to their CFO or controller, and there's 200 of them. So we were able to figure out those named accounts, and our outbound got a lot more deliberate and strategic. So we would send them gifts, we would call them, we would email them. But most importantly for us, at least, was driving almost like network referral effects. I don't know if that's what I would call them. But essentially, all these people know each other, and they go to like the lobbying group of the insurance industry once a year and talk about the CFO working panel. And so being as hopeful that people would sort of seed us and encourage that, to being like, hey, our investor, can you offer to talk at that CFO panel and name drop some stuff on sort of the more authentic to more nefarious end of that. But things like that, driving that like continuity and their peers talking about us is what we found to be most effective, so that when we would outbound them and we would send them a nice gift, they would be much more receptive to talking to us.
Laura?
I think similar things, and actually I wish I had heard this panel like 10 years ago, because I think I started sales from this approach of like, sales and marketing from this, like, you have to scale everything, you have to figure out how you're going to build this big sales team, they're going to have to do all this cold outbounding and blah, 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 and have a tech stack that you spend $1 zillion on to then do that. And I think, like, for the most part, when you're selling in financial service, in our case to banks, there's only so many banks in the country, or fintech companies. There's only so many people at each of those who can make this decision, this buying decision. So you're dealing with numbers in the hundreds, thousands, right? But it's not millions. And so I think and it's just people on the other side of that. So it's like, what do I want to do to get this particular person's attention? Outbound emails sometimes work. We have not ever really seen like tremendous success with that. I don't ever think. I think we will incrementally get better. We'll invest in better content to drive better open rates. Blah blah blah. I just don't ever think that's going to be a huge driver of pipeline for us. The biggest drivers for us are inbound, organic, referral. So part of it is like, the tool I wish existed, this probably does exist somewhere, but it's like, how do I track the movement of all these people in my network, right? Like all these people from banks are moving around, from fintech companies are moving, compliance officers are jumping from one place to another. How do I just track that movement and jump on it, right? So as soon as an Alloy customer here leaves and they go over there, and they often jump on it for us, right? They call and they go, I was a customer over here, I'm here now, I want to talk to you. But could we sort of preempt that? And so I think it's like just tracking people and building this network. And really, we very early invested in this idea of community and like building a community around us. Our customers don't always want to hear from us, but they want to talk to each other. And when I mean don't want to hear from us, I just mean like they don't necessarily want to be sold to all the time, but they do want to meet each other. Fraud experts want to talk to other fraud experts. Compliance experts want to talk to other compliance experts. And so if you invite them to a room and you pay for their drinks, a lot of them will show up. And this is actually where I think there's a big discrepancy in my experience between fintech companies and banks. Fintech companies, by and large, a lot of the champions we have or people who buy our product actually don't want to come to a lot of events and learn.
So agree with you on that.
They might come to a really fancy dinner.
Yep.
Or they might come to like meet some, high profile other customer we have or something, but they don't really want to come hear someone talk about something. Bank people do. They want to come and they want to learn. And so I think that's also, we over-invested then in the subsequent years in like a client conference that we do banking summits, we do dinners, kind of the same set of things, and they show up. They like are really eager participants. They take notes, they listen, they talk to each other, and it's been fantastic. It's like the highest ROI pipeline building thing I think we do.
It's amazing. Actually, that reminds me, so I remember at FinTech Meetup, right, which is one of our conferences, we organized a dinner for banks, and I was 2 minutes late, and all the bankers, they were there.
Yeah, they want to come.
And actually, at that dinner, typically when we do similar dinners with fintechs, like at Money 2020, 20-30% people won't show up. And that's because all the fintech people, they go sign up for multiple events. The bank people, if they commit to your event, they are showing up, and they're showing up on time.
We invited a bunch to a White Sox game, which was like the worst game in the entire world. I think it was like the worst game of the decade, and they all came. I thought we were going to turn them off, but they came.
So reliable. Any other, I love this thread on kind of like little creative tactics that you've used. Andrew, anything that you've done that's kind of just creative and fun that has kind of worked?
Yeah, let me answer that in a second. I want to add just one thing, which is I think to all of these points is like it relies on the people trusting and liking you, regardless of whatever your product does. So it's really, really, really important to build that relationship with them. So one thing that we've done, and I wish we had done earlier and better, and still I want us to do it better today, is like over-invest in onboarding and support and launch, because that's when you're building those relationships with folks really. And that's been the most important thing for us to get them to like us, to then refer us and talk about us and come to these events downstream. And so they're not going to do that if they like feel like if you haven't gone above and beyond to build a relationship with them as part of onboarding. So that's something that we've seen as really valuable. In terms of like something that we've done that, I don't know, I think is funny is every year before conference season, we have a new hat, which we send to people. And so now people like ask us about our hats. The first one was, I'm sure everyone's seen it on like Instagram or whatever, was just EBITDA. So, then they like that. And then we did Rise and Bind, which is an insurance term. And this year is going to say, because we sell to CFOs, it's a cruel world, because we sell them accounting software. So people like that kind of funny stuff.
It picks up on the consumer panel, which is around, a consistent message delivered again and again. So you're doing that. I want to pivot to sales teams. So you've all talked about having kind of a direct outbound team. When did you make that first sales hire? Was it a good hire? What were the right skills? If you had to do it again, what would you be looking for? But let's talk about that.
We made our first sales hire 4 years in because we just didn't have any money until then. We did try. I will say we tried a consultant before, which I think is representative of a really big mistake that I'm sure lots of startup people make, which is we hired this like older, experienced sales leader guy who swore that he wanted to do the startup thing, but I could not get him to take a single call ever. He just wanted to like build a team, and we had 3 customers. It was like just couldn't be a worse fit. Unfortunately, we cycled through that pretty fast. It was obvious quickly that was not going to work. We need people to actually just talk to customers. It's part of the job. And then we hired a fantastic sales guy who started. We deliberately wanted someone who'd had a little bit of sales leadership experience. He had some product experience, which helped a lot, but was willing to just like do the IC job. So he kind of sat with me day in, day out for a while. And then when we were ready to scale, he made his first few sales hires. And I thought he might sort of tap out at that point, but he actually continued to build and grow and ran multiple sales teams for many years. And so I think with him, I feel like we got a little bit lucky, but I do think that the key component that I would search for again was that player coach, can kind of flex up, flex down, and like no drama. He's still like, will get on any customer call that, I ask of him. So the no drama, no kind of low maintenance was really important. It's still important for almost any startup.
And when did you know you were ready for, you mentioned the kind of fundraising issue, but like when did you know you were ready for a sales hire?
When I was doing demos like all day at that point, and it was like once I literally cannot like do any more, just my schedule is so packed that I need someone else kind of stepping in to do these sales calls basically with me. And that was all inbound driven. So for me, it was when my calendar was we had to have someone else, otherwise we were going to be turning people away. In retrospect, we sort of waited too long, but at that point also the market just changed really quickly. Like we went from like nothing to crazy sort of pipeline in a very short time, and so I don't know how much we could have anticipated it. And I will say we also started channel partnerships piece pretty early too, because that ended up being something that to serve banks it was very clear we had to be integrated into this other set of companies, this other set of tools that banks were consuming. That's the only way they would consume our product, and so we developed that motion, that channel partnership motion, pretty early, I think, relative to lots of companies.
Andrew, how about you?
We hired a salesperson pretty early that also didn't work out. I think we're probably like 50-50 on all the salespeople we have hired of all time. But so the person who I think of as like our sort of real first salesperson is still with the company. And we hired this person just because they came from and I think this is a little atypical advice, or I don't know if it's advice, just our experience is atypical. It's not what people tell you to do. We hired someone who came from the industry, who had, relationship and Rolodex. Didn't have a ton of experience in like SaaS, Silicon Valley type companies, but was just so values aligned and committed to what we were doing and wanted to be a part of a winning team. And that person has worked out great. And contrasting that to the person who, and because we didn't know what we were doing, right? And so having someone who knew the industry helped us a ton, whereas if we just put in like best in class like SaaS methodology, you can go really fast in the wrong direction, and that's a little bit what we found. So, our first real sales hire who came from the industry was really great and has proven to be, incredibly coachable, incredibly open. So I think for those early hires, like look for someone who you want to spend a lot of time with and work with and trust.
Coachable is I like coachable too. I think that's
because a lot of the best salespeople, especially none of us were enterprise salespeople before, don't know how to do it. And turns out salespeople are really good at convincing you that they're doing it the right way because that's their job. And so you kind of second guess yourself a little bit. So someone who you just authentically trust and is coachable is great. And my favorite anecdote about this person is we've moved him to every segment. He did like SMB, mid-market. He now does enterprise. He did partnerships for a while. And part of it was like building his comp plan, which is always different. And enterprise salespeople from SaaS backgrounds will build their own comp plan, which are really expensive, turns out. But this guy, I was like, Chris, again, we don't know how this is going to work out. Like, what do you think it should be? And he's like, I'm going to be honest. In 3 years I've been here, I've never once looked at my commission, which I was like, that's shocking. You probably should, because I probably make a mistake. But it just sort of confirmed that he was just like here to win. And that was a great confirmation.
Cool. Soups?
Yeah, no, that's a that's a great lesson in there. Yeah, I also made that same mistake. So the first sales hire that we made didn't really work out. That was within like 3 months of starting the company. And it was the reason was that, when you are selling while building the product, you need to be, engaged directly with the buyer. And, we didn't have any materials for her to actually rely on because we had, not even built the product. So how can I even provide you with marketing materials, right? So that didn't work out. We parted ways together. And then I have two co-founders. So between the three of us, we asked each other, okay, who does sales? And they all looked at me and said, okay, you do it. And then I had to go learn it. And I had a similar experience like Laura. We were. This is 2020, 2021. So fintech was booming. And I was just in calls day in and day out. And I didn't want to hire a salesperson because of my prior experience. But, someone through the network reached out and became my first sales hire and now our head of sales and still there as a head of sales. And, and when he first started, because of my past experience, like I told him, I'm not looking for someone to come and build a team. I'm not going to be able to provide you with any materials. And actually the humility of this guy was amazing. So, most salespeople, they like to talk, but he would actually, the first month he followed me in all the demos and he would open up the conversation, build a relationship, let me do the demo, and then come in for the close, right? And then he would do all the follow-ups afterwards, right? And that was that allowed me to scale because I didn't. Previously, I was like taking calls. I remember at peak like 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. and then dinner and then doing all the follow-ups. So I didn't need to do all the follow-ups anymore. So to make a long story short, it happened to us like organically, but the time when we hired the sales hire was like when I had already closed $1 million of ARR myself. So that's when we had some repeatability. There was some decks that I could provide him, and then he could actually go on and do it himself. Right?
I think we were on the same milestone, and I think one thing that I still think even at our scale is like don't let go of founder sales until you really, really have to, and it's still important as if you're up market, I think particularly. And so doing what Soup said, if you can scale yourself in some way, right, by having someone else do the follow-ups, but you're still there. Like, as a founder, you get this special access and special privileges that even if you suck at selling, just has this sort of sheen to it that you're going to get into certain rooms you're not going to get into otherwise, and people want to talk to you. And so I think being able to leverage that for as long as you can is really critical.
Could I ask you a question, Laura? So do you ever have your sales team telling you, no, I want to do the whole thing, and they don't want to utilize you, or that doesn't happen in your case?
Sales reps?
Yeah.
Well, they definitely don't want me doing demos because my demos are terrible at this point.
Yeah.
So yes, there are certain things they do not want me doing. No, but I think our reps really like using me and my co-founder as door openers largely, or my co-founder is great at sort of the consultate, like coming in and listening to a bank talk about their fraud problems, and he's just like a fantastic sort of brainstormer to have on that call. And so, they use us wherever they can. But I am definitely not as good as our seasoned sales reps who are, like, they know how to do sales. There is a actual method to it, right? And I was never trained like that. I'm not that good at the follow-ups. I don't get paid commission.
What I was going to say is I think founders should always be the best SDR. Like, we can open more doors than anyone. You can ask for favors. You probably remember weird stuff about these people that make, that they like to ski in Stowe or whatever, and you can say that and they feel special. So I think founders should always be the best enterprise SDR, and it's easiest for us.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, we often talk to founders, especially at that transition phase, where they're scared to give up the sale, right? And so I think you coming into close is a really important way to feel like you can be involved in the process. You can still have that level of control, but you can scale a little bit better. So I think it's a smart transition. Last thing I want to talk about before we open it up for Q&A, you've alluded to it a little bit. I know we talked about in the prep around kind of multi-product lines, right? So I know all of you started with, and many in this room, you start with a narrow wedge, you have a specific problem, and then you want to build and scale. So I'd love to hear, what that has looked like for each of you, and then some of the reasons why you pulled up, some of the challenges you faced, and maybe just some of the lessons that folks from here might want to take away. Soups, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are very much a horizontal platform or compound startup, as the new term nowadays is, right? So we do both fraud, compliance, and most recently credit risk assessment as a service all together. And our pitch has always been that similar to what Laura said earlier, the buyers on our side have like 20, 30 different vendors, and they are looking to consolidate. That's where we come in. Now, in our case, therefore, as you can imagine, it's all about finding the right wedge. And unlike a lot of advice that you would hear are mostly built for point solutions where it's all about one thing that you've built perfectly. In our case, none of those lessons apply. If I am going into a call where the buyer is expecting me to just show a demo, I can guarantee you that call, in the very first call they want a demo, I can guarantee you that opportunity is not going anywhere. Why? Because it's such a wide platform with so many features that I could not possibly give you a demo of everything and have you still pay attention. Where it works for us is consultative selling. So, like it's all about asking the right questions and getting them to open up. We tell our reps that, if you are talking like 80% of the time and they talk 20% of the time, that deal is not happening. It should be the other way around as well, right? And when I look back in my first year of selling, all the times I got my ass kicked was because I spoke and spoke and spoke and just showed them this feature and that feature and never even asked them what did they actually want, right? So therefore, the only lesson I have here, if you're a multi-product, is, be consultative and never go with a particular plan in mind, because that plan is going to change. Because the other thing I realized in all the sales prep calls that my sales team would sometimes tell me, Soups, we are going to coach you. This is what you're going to say. All those calls, they failed. Because I couldn't think outside the box. But when I go naturally and I'm consultative, that's when I can land the deal, right?
Andrew?
Yeah. Soup said something on our prep call that has really stuck with me, and I think it resonates a lot, and it's definitely true for us, which is similarly, we're multi-product. We sell, across different finance and accounting functions, again, all to insurance companies. But you said you get known for your wedge or your initial product wedge, and it's really hard to change how you appear in market. And that's definitely been true of us. Our initial wedge for small and medium-sized companies was not something that, or it's very relevant for enterprises, but it's a much, much, much bigger thing that touches hundreds of people in their org. So those folks aren't like really super down to engage on that right away. So we actually had to switch our wedge product for enterprise to a secondary product that's much more contained just within the accounting function. And that was a really good learning for us. But even when we go to those folks, they're like, oh yeah, we know you guys do this. And we're like, we do this and that. And our SDRs who outbound these folks, they have two tracks, right? Like they qualify them and they say, do you want this or this? Or they don't say, do you want this or this? They try to figure out which they want so that we can enter with the right wedge, because sometimes, rarely, the initial product is still relevant to those bigger folks as the initial wedge, but it's figuring out that path of least resistance. And often as a platform, that means trying to get people to change their perception of you, which is incredibly hard.
Laura?
I could talk about this all day because this is the area where I think we made the most mistakes and grew the most, going from a single product for many years to multi-product a few years ago. And so I think it changes everything, like go-to-market org, incentive comp, even product and engineering, like everything we had to sort of re-examine and have had several iterations. I think the biggest lessons I've learned are similarly, I think, to what you both are saying. Like one is, are you a set of different products, or are you one big platform that have these different sort of things you offer? And it might be different by customer. So for us, there are segments where we don't even talk about this other stuff. We don't even bring it up because we know, like very big banks, we don't talk about one of our products with. I hope to someday, but right now, it's like no one's gonna buy that product. We don't want to confuse the message with talking about it. I would say in practice, once we land that big bank, we want to start finding the champions who'd be interested in the second product, blah, blah, blah. But like first sale, do not confuse it. There are some customers where we talk about one product. They know we talk about the second product, but they're going to buy them in succession. We have some customers who view it as like truly one platform, and they almost don't really distinguish it. And it took us too long to figure that out, to go by, like, to make this kind of matrix that is like product and then customer segment. I think we sort of just treated it as like product first, looking at the different products. And we did have this existential debate of like, is it one product? Is it under the platform? Is it different products? And so where we've landed now is this more nuanced version that I think gets us much farther. And then organizationally, we really went back and forth of like, do we have sales specialists who do these certain products? And some people sell this and some people don't sell this. Where we've landed now, and I think what's worked well, is it's not like I don't think it's a dogmatic view of that. But it's really, we have a couple of people who, based maybe on their backgrounds or their tenures at Alloy, are just excellent at understanding and selling, the harder product or the newer product in our case. And so we have a couple of people, so both on the sales side and the solutions engineering side, who really, really work on those deals, I would say, for the first year until it gets to a certain scale. And then we try to make it more with training and enablement and blah, 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 make other people able to sell it more effectively. But that's really helped us get from, I would say, like a very shallow understanding across the entire sales team and like no one's really closing deals to 2-3 people who live and breathe this. Maybe they get a kicker on those deals, some sort of compensation. But if they get really good at that, then you're closing more deals and the people around them are excited to learn about that product. And so that helped us, but we really screwed that up for a long time.
One other thing I'd love to add is just, and we made this mistake of being short-term greedy, where we would be in a sales process with one product and then we'd be like, let's introduce the other one. And that would just completely derail it.
Yep.
And so it's just like,
Yep.
sell your product, get live, get going, and be long-term greedy. Don't try to confuse it because everything immediately goes off the rails.
Yeah, the sales process does not end when that first contract is signed. Yeah.
Similar stories, right? Like sometimes using an example here, fraud buyer and compliance buyer at a bank or a fintech are different, and there's some internal politics that you are not at all aware of. So whenever we've tried to introduce, we're selling one and introduce the other, it never goes well.